The conference hall was buzzing with polished suits and rehearsed smiles, the kind of place where everyone pretends to belong. At the far end of the room, a man cleared his throat to introduce the keynote speaker, the woman who had built an empire out of nothing. Cameras clicked, investors leaned forward, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she walked in, calm, measured, unapologetic. The daughter once dismissed as worthless by her own father now owned the very stage where world leaders and CEOs came to listen. Her name, Evelyn Carter, the same Evelyn her father had told her brother to forget. The same Evelyn he said wasn't worth a penny. But here's the twist. This moment wasn't about proving her father wrong. It was about proving herself right, about refusing to be buried under the weight of rejection. And oh, how sweetly ironic it was that the man who once dismissed her now sat in the audience, too ashamed to meet her gaze. You see, people often think success comes from luck or inheritance. But Evelyn's story? It was built brick by brick, out of scars, sacrifice, and the kind of pain that either destroys you or turns you into steel. She was never the chosen one. Her brother got the praise, the attention, the resources. She got silence, doubt, and daggers disguised as words, and yet here she stood. Proof that rejection doesn't just sting, it can fuel revolutions. Now, before we dive into the empire and the triumph, let's rewind the tape. Because the Evelyn you see today wasn't always this powerhouse commanding rooms of power. She was once just a girl sitting in the shadows of her father's disappointment, clutching dreams no one else believed in. So how did the discarded daughter become the face on magazine covers? The name whispered in boardrooms and the woman who turned humiliation into legacy? Well, story lovers, buckle in. This journey isn't about glitz and glory, it's about grit and guts. It's about the nights no one clapped, the mornings that felt impossible, and the choices that redefined not just her future, but her family's name. Welcome, story lovers. From where are you watching? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see just how far Evelyn's story travels. Evelyn Carter wasn't born into a life of wealth or admiration. She came from a small town where opportunities were scarce and where your worth was often measured by how well you conformed to expectations. Her father, a stern man with a sharp tongue, believed sons were investments and daughters were burdens. To him, her brother was the future, the one who carried the family's pride. Evelyn? She was just extra, a responsibility to marry off, not someone to nurture or invest in. But Evelyn had different plans. From childhood, she was restless with curiosity. She loved books, devoured them cover to cover, and dreamed of building something bigger than herself. While her father proudly displayed her brother's school trophies, Evelyn quietly filled notebooks with business ideas, sketching plans for companies she imagined she might one day run. It wasn't about fame or money. It was about proving she was capable of more than the narrow life laid out for her. Still, in her house, ambition didn't suit daughters. Every time she excelled in school, her father would shrug, saying, "Grades don't put food on the table. Leave the thinking to your brother." And yet she kept going. Teachers praised her essays, her math scores, her leadership in class projects. Evelyn clung to those small recognitions because at home, encouragement never came. By the time she was in high school, Evelyn dreamed of studying business and finance at a top university. She applied for scholarships in secret, hiding acceptance letters in her dresser drawer like forbidden love notes. But then came the moment everything crumbled. Her father found one of those letters. Instead of pride, he laughed. "Business school? Who's going to pay for that? You think you'll be running companies? No one's going to invest in you." He tore the letter in half, and with it, something inside Evelyn cracked. That was the betrayal that cut deepest, not just the rejection, but the dismissal of her very existence. Her brother, meanwhile, received everything she was denied. College tuition, car money, guidance from family connections. Evelyn was told to be practical, so she worked, first at a diner, then at a local store. Every paycheck went toward keeping the household afloat, paying bills her father couldn't manage, and even covering her brother's extra expenses when he forgot his responsibilities. Evelyn became invisible support, a ghost holding up the walls of a house where she was never truly seen. But life wasn't done testing her. Just when she thought things couldn't get worse, her mother fell ill. The hospital bills piled up. Her father grew bitter, snapping at everyone, lashing out at Evelyn as if she were the reason life was collapsing. Nights were long, filled with the sound of her mother coughing in the next room, and mornings were harder when Evelyn dragged herself to work knowing she'd never hear a "thank you," and yet she survived. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet acts of sacrifice. She skipped meals so her mother could eat better. She wore old shoes until the soles split, just to save a few dollars for medicine. When her brother dropped out of college after squandering his opportunities, Evelyn silently picked up extra shifts to cover the debts he left behind. Still, she never let her mind go dull. Every night after long hours on her feet, she'd sit in the glow of a second-hand laptop, watching free lectures on economics, reading articles about startups, studying how small businesses survived. It wasn't about chasing a dream anymore. It was about staying alive while secretly preparing for a future no one believed she deserved. Her father, however, never missed a chance to remind her of her place. The line that haunted her most was one he repeated often, almost like a curse. "You're not worth a penny." He said it in front of her brother, in front of relatives, even in front of her mother. Those words dug deep, carving scars into her confidence. But instead of killing her spirit, they hardened her resolve. Pain, for Evelyn, became both a prison and a weapon. She learned to hide her wounds, to turn humiliation into motivation. Each small act of survival was a brick in the foundation of a fortress no one could see yet, but one she was building piece by piece in the shadows. Looking back, those years were the crucible. The endless grind, the silent sacrifices, the cruel words, those were the fires that shaped her steel. She wasn't the chosen one, but she was the one who refused to give up. And in the silence of her uncelebrated struggle, something powerful was growing, a determination that would one day change everything. But of course, she didn't know it then. All she knew was that she was exhausted, overlooked, and one wrong turn away from collapse. What she didn't see coming was the moment that would shift her life forever, the turning point that would take her from invisible servant to unstoppable force, and that's where our story pivots. Evelyn's life could have easily stayed in the shadows. Long hours at dead-end jobs, caring for her mother, and surviving paycheck to paycheck. But life has a strange way of planting seeds in the unlikeliest places. For Evelyn, that seed sprouted during one of her late-night cleaning shifts at an office building she'd been assigned to. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where fatigue blurred her vision and the hum of fluorescent lights felt like punishment. She was scrubbing coffee stains off a conference table when she noticed a laptop glowing faintly. Someone had left it open, spreadsheets still on the screen. She almost looked away, privacy wasn't hers to breach, but then a line of text caught her eye. Q3 adjustments, conceal losses, redirect allocations. It didn't sit right. Evelyn wasn't a trained accountant, but she knew enough from her self-study to recognize shady numbers when she saw them. Out of curiosity, she scrolled through the file. What she uncovered left her breathless. Millions in hidden discrepancies, numbers shifted like puzzle pieces to make the company appear profitable. It wasn't just careless bookkeeping, it was fraud. She could have closed the laptop and walked away. After all, she was a cleaner, not an auditor. Who would listen to her? But then she thought of her father's words, the ones that always slashed her dignity. "You're not worth a penny." Maybe this was her moment to prove that she could be worth more than silence. That night, Evelyn took a photo with her old flip phone. The image was blurry, but it was enough to keep her awake till dawn. She cross-checked the numbers against public records, then scribbled calculations on scrap paper. The more she dug, the clearer it became. Someone at the top was stealing, and no one seemed to notice. Now came the dilemma. What to do with this knowledge? Stay quiet, keep scrubbing floors, and pretend she never saw it? Or take the risk of speaking up, knowing it could cost her the only job she had? Enter Marcus, a security guard at the building who had become her only friend during night shifts. Over shared vending machine snacks, she confided in him. Marcus was cautious, warning her. People at the top don't like being exposed. Be careful. But Evelyn's resolve was stronger than fear. She'd been invisible too long, so she took a leap. One anonymous email to a regulatory board, one snapshot of manipulated numbers attached, one gamble that the truth, however dangerous, might finally set her on a different path. The response wasn't instant. Weeks passed with no word, and Evelyn began to doubt herself. Maybe no one cared. Maybe she was foolish to think she could matter. But then the storm hit. Investigators showed up unannounced. Executives scrambled. Rumors flew through the building like wildfire. And Evelyn, still mopping floors in silence, watched it all unfold with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Her anonymous tip had triggered a corporate earthquake. But success doesn't come gift-wrapped. While investigators dismantled fraudulent schemes, Evelyn faced new obstacles. A rival cleaner, jealous of the attention she was quietly receiving, began spreading rumors. Supervisors became suspicious, asking why she always seemed too interested in office work. And worst of all, she still had no safety net. If her identity leaked, she could be blacklisted from even menial jobs. Amid this chaos, a new figure entered her life. Julia, a mid-level auditor assigned to the case. Julia noticed Evelyn lingering near the offices, asking subtle questions about finance. Instead of dismissing her, Julia saw something unusual, a cleaner with an analyst's eye. One evening, Julia pulled Evelyn aside. "You see patterns others miss," she said. "Ever thought about doing this professionally?" That single sentence ignited something Evelyn had buried for years. Here was recognition, not from family or neighbors, but from a professional who mattered. For the first time, someone believed she had potential, but with hope came risk. Julia offered to mentor her quietly, slipping Evelyn textbooks and online resources, guiding her through financial reports after hours. It was dangerous. If either of them were caught, they'd face backlash. Yet Evelyn couldn't resist. Every late-night lesson fueled her hunger. Every spreadsheet strengthened the muscles she'd been training in secret for years. The stakes grew higher when whispers reached her father. A relative mentioned Evelyn's strange involvement with auditors, and her father exploded. "Stay out of men's business," he barked. "You'll ruin yourself. Don't embarrass this family." His disapproval was as predictable as it was painful. Still, Evelyn pressed on. Then came the ultimate test. The investigators needed an insider to explain a particularly complex cover-up. Julia, trusting Evelyn's growing expertise, suggested her name in hushed tones. It was reckless. It was audacious. And it was the first time Evelyn's invisible work might actually be seen. She agreed, not for glory, but because she couldn't go back to silence. From that moment, there was no turning back. Evelyn was no longer just a cleaner with dreams stuffed in notebooks. She was part of something bigger, something that could topple the powerful, and finally prove that the daughter deemed worthless had been carrying extraordinary worth all along. The rising storm would test her limits, threaten her stability, and force her into choices she never imagined making. And at its peak, it would deliver the breaking point. The moment when everything would either collapse or transform forever. The storm Evelyn had quietly stirred behind the scenes was about to break wide open. Investigators had gathered fragments of evidence, spreadsheets, and insider whispers, but it wasn't enough to topple the executives running the fraud. What they needed was a voice, a witness, someone who could walk them through the tangled maze of numbers and expose the lies in plain daylight. The problem? The only person who understood the scheme well enough to make it clear was Evelyn. When Julia first suggested her name, the room of auditors scoffed. "A cleaner? You want us to put a janitor on the stand?" one of them muttered. Evelyn sat in the back, invisible as always, her mop leaning against the wall. She felt the sting of their dismissal, but she also felt something else: fire. This was her shot. The world might mock her title, but she had the truth in her hands, and truth doesn't need a business card to matter. The day of the confrontation arrived. It wasn't a courtroom, not yet. It was a boardroom, sleek, glass-walled, the kind of place that smelled of power and money. The executives were seated around a polished oak table, their suits pressed, their expressions smug. They expected a routine review, maybe a slap on the wrist. They had no idea who was about to walk through the door. "Excuse me, this is a closed meeting," the CFO snapped when Evelyn entered with Julia. His tone dripped with disdain. As if swatting away a fly, Evelyn didn't flinch. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "You might want to open it," she said. She slid a stack of papers across the table, handwritten notes, photocopies, and highlighted spreadsheets. The room grew tense. "What's this?" one of the executives asked, his voice brittle. "This," Evelyn replied, "is the trail you thought no one would find. The hidden losses, the redirected funds, the numbers you massaged into fairy tales. And this," she tapped the top page, "is the proof I've already sent to regulators, investigators, and yes, a news outlet or two." The silence was deafening. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. And then, the CEO's jaw dropped as he recognized the unmistakable accuracy of the numbers. Evelyn had pieced together the entire fraud from scraps and late-night study sessions. The humiliation in that moment wasn't hers. It was theirs. A woman they had never even noticed, a woman whose labor they barely acknowledged, had just outsmarted them on their own turf. Still, the sting of rejection clung to her like smoke. One executive sneered, "You're just a cleaner. Who's going to believe you?" That was the dagger. But Evelyn had prepared for this cut. She leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "They don't have to believe me. They'll believe the IRS, they'll believe the SEC, and they'll believe every journalist waiting to run the story. You can erase my name, but you can't erase these numbers." For the first time in her life, Evelyn watched powerful men shrink. Their faces drained of color. Their confidence cracked. She stood taller, not because the fear was gone, but because she had finally decided to stop letting it own her. She gathered her papers, tucked them under her arm, and turned toward the door. "I'll let myself out," she said. And with that, she walked away, not as a cleaner, not as the discarded daughter, but as the most powerful person in the room. Word of the scandal exploded within days. News outlets ran headlines about the fraud. Executives were dragged into legal battles. Careers ended overnight. And in the center of the chaos was Evelyn, the anonymous whistleblower whose courage had set it all in motion. But power doesn't come without a cost. Her identity eventually leaked. For weeks, her phone rang nonstop, reporters, lawyers, threats. Some praised her as a hero. Others painted her as reckless, even dangerous. She had taken on giants, and giants don't fall quietly. Yet through it all, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. No longer invisible. No longer worthless. She had faced the fire and walked through it alive. This was her breaking point. The moment when humiliation turned into revelation. The moment when her father's cruel prophecy, "You're not worth a penny," was shattered into dust. Because now she had proven, not just to him, but to the world, that her worth could never be measured in pennies. Dear audience, if you're enjoying Evelyn's journey, don't forget to give this story a like. It really helps more people find inspiring stories like this one. But don't move yet, because if you think this was the end, you're wrong. What followed wasn't just survival, it was redemption. It was the building of an empire from the ruins of rejection. And it's a chapter you don't want to miss. Ruth walked out of that boardroom with nothing but a napkin, yet in truth, she carried a lifetime's worth of dignity on her shoulders. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the janitor who blended into the walls. She felt seen. She felt powerful. But more than that, she felt free. The company panicked in the days that followed. Lawyers scrambled, press statements were issued, executives resigned in hushed disgrace. And Ruth, she had choices, real choices. The CEO himself tried to lure her with an executive position, the kind of offer that would have made her younger self beam with pride. A corner office, a six-figure salary, prestige. But Ruth smiled and declined. Why? Because she realized something profound. True redemption doesn't come from joining the same system that once ignored you. It comes from building your own. With the settlement money and the recognition from her whistleblowing, Ruth opened a small consulting firm. It wasn't flashy at first, just a rented office above a bakery, a second-hand desk, and a dream. But Ruth had something bigger than capital. She had fire, and she had lived through enough hunger, enough rejection, and enough sleepless nights to know exactly what women like her needed: opportunity. So she created it. Ruth's firm specialized in forensic accounting, but her mission stretched beyond balance sheets. She sought out single mothers, women who had been dismissed, underestimated, or told they weren't worth a penny. She trained them, mentored them, gave them not just jobs but dignity. Within 2 years, Fortune 500 companies were hiring Ruth's firm to handle audits. The same boardrooms that once silenced her now called her in for advice. And when she walked into those rooms, she didn't need to raise her voice. Her personal life blossomed too. Her son, who once watched her scrub floors late into the night, now walked across the graduation stage as valedictorian. He didn't just inherit her resilience, he learned it by watching her fight through impossible odds. And when he looked into the audience, Ruth's eyes were full of tears, not from exhaustion, but from pride. Even her family, the same voices that once questioned her worth, had shifted. They didn't always say the words, but their silence had softened into respect. They saw what the world now saw, a woman who had rewritten her story, not by chance but by choice. But Ruth never let wealth or recognition cloud her humility. She still carried her lunch in a reused bag. She still wore the same old watch she bought on clearance during her cleaning days. She didn't care for flaunting, she cared for impact. Every Friday, she hosted workshops for underprivileged women at her office. She would tell them, "Your past doesn't cancel your future. You can start from the basement and still end up owning the building." And they believed her because she was living proof. Years later, Ruth received an award from a national business association. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, and applause filled the hall. When she stepped up to the microphone, she didn't talk about money or success. She talked about invisible women, the cleaners, the single mothers, the overlooked dreamers. Her speech ended with one sentence that made the crowd rise to their feet. "For years I was told I wasn't worth a penny. Today, I know I'm worth more than gold, and so are all of you." Her story didn't just redeem her. It became a blueprint for others, a movement. Because Ruth's greatest victory wasn't exposing fraud or building a company. It was proving once and for all that no one, not a boss, not a system, not even family, has the final word on your worth. And in the quiet of her new home, surrounded by books and laughter instead of overdue bills and silence, Ruth would sometimes sit by the window with a cup of tea. She'd glance at her framed degree, once mocked as useless, now standing as a symbol of perseverance, and she would smile, whispering to herself, "I was never invisible." They just weren't looking. That was Ruth's redemption. From cleaner to consultant, from dismissed to undeniable. Her journey is a reminder, for every viewer watching, that your story isn't finished yet. If Ruth's story inspired you, share this video and subscribe for more real stories of resilience and hope. Because sometimes the person the world counts out ends up rewriting the ending. They once told Ruth she wasn't worth a penny. But the truth? She carried a wealth far greater than money: perseverance, dignity, courage. Qualities no bank statement could ever measure. Her story reminds us that worth isn't defined by titles, paychecks, or the judgments of others. Worth is proven in silence, in resilience, in the quiet battles no one sees. Ruth scrubbed floors while holding on to a dream. She held her family together with hands blistered from work but unshaken in faith. And when the moment came, she didn't just rise, she transformed. Ask yourself, how many people around us right now are living unseen battles? How many dreams are buried under survival? What would happen if just one person, one opportunity, gave them the chance to rise? Ruth's journey isn't just her own. It's a mirror held up to all of us. It tells us that no matter how underestimated, dismissed, or invisible you feel, you are still capable of shaking entire systems, rewriting endings, and inspiring generations. And the final twist? Ruth didn't just walk away with her own redemption. Years later, one of the women she trained at her consulting firm went on to become the first female CFO of a major corporation. In her acceptance speech, that woman said, I owe my success to someone who was once told she wasn't worth a penny. But to me, she was worth the world because she believed in me before anyone else did. That's Ruth's legacy. Not just the fraud she exposed or the firm she built, but the ripple of courage she passed forward. A chain of empowerment that keeps growing long after her own fight ended. So the next time you see someone invisible, a cleaner, a cashier, a struggling mother, remember Ruth? The mop, the uniform, the silence. They don't define them. Their dreams do, because sometimes the person the world overlooks is the one destined to change it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.